In 1872, a saloon in Sioux City, Iowa, laid out oyster soup, deviled ham, lobster salad, pickled oysters, salmon, and radishes, all of it free. The only catch was you had to buy 2 drinks first. That was the deal in every saloon from Dodge City to Deadwood. You paid for the whiskey. The food came with it. And it was not some sad bowl of peanuts. Number 14 on this list was so popular that one Chicago saloon went through 540 of them in a single sitting. And number 3 was a full roasted animal that saloon keepers carved right there at the bar, while men gambled behind them. These 25 foods built the most brilliant business model in American history. Subscribe, because this list gets wilder as we go. Number 25. Salted pretzels. Thick, hard, twisted pretzels, dusted with coarse salt, sat in baskets at the end of every bar from the 1860s onward. German immigrants brought the recipe and the business instinct behind it. A pretzel cost almost nothing to make: flour, water, salt, and a quick boil in lye water before baking. A single batch served dozens of men. But the genius was in the salt. Every bite dried out a man's throat and sent him reaching for his glass. One more whiskey, then another pretzel, then another whiskey. The cycle could run for hours. Barkeepers in San Francisco, Denver, and Kansas City all understood this. The pretzel was not generosity, it was strategy. The crunch echoed through smoky rooms where cowboys and miners sat shoulder to shoulder, too proud to admit the house was winning. A 5-cent glass of beer bought access to the pretzel basket. That was the unspoken rule, and the pretzels never ran out. Number 24. Rye bread and butter. Thick slabs of dark rye bread slathered with butter anchored the free lunch spread across the Midwest and Great Plains. German barkeepers baked it themselves or bought it for pennies a loaf. The dense, sour crumb filled stomachs fast, slowing the alcohol and keeping men upright long enough to order another round. In mining towns like Virginia City, a man could walk in after a 12-hour shift, drop a dime for a shot, and eat 3 slices of rye with butter thick enough to leave fingerprints on the glass. The bread sat on wooden boards, uncovered, collecting dust and cigar ash equally. Nobody complained. Rye bread was the backbone of the free lunch. Not flashy, not memorable, but without it, the whole system collapsed. Hungry men leave, full men stay and drink. Number 23. Yellow cheese. Blocks of sharp cheddar sat on every free lunch counter from New York to Nevada. Sliced thick with a single knife that never saw a washcloth, the cheese was cheap, durable, and salty enough to keep the whiskey flowing. In frontier saloons, cheese could sit out for hours in the heat without spoiling, a quality that made it indispensable when there was no icebox behind the bar. Cowboys would hack off a wedge, fold it into a slice of rye, and call it supper. The combination of fat and salt hit harder than anything a chuckwagon could offer after weeks on the trail. A whole wheel cost less than $1 in the 1870s and served a saloon for days. The cheese was never fancy. It sat next to the pretzels and the pickles, sweating in the lamplight, and men ate it without ceremony because ceremony was not the point. The point was staying long enough to lose your paycheck at the faro table. Roasted peanuts filled bowls on bar counters across the frontier from the 1870s onward. Peanuts grew cheap and plentiful in Virginia and Georgia, and the railroads carried them west by the barrel. A 50-pound sack cost almost nothing. The shells piled up on the floor, crunching underfoot, mixing with sawdust and tobacco spit into a carpet that told you exactly what kind of establishment you had walked into. Some saloons roasted their own in cast iron pans behind the counter, and the smell of hot peanuts and wood smoke drifted out through the swinging doors into the street, pulling men inside like a fishing line. Children gathered outside, hoping for a handful tossed through the window. Peanuts were the poor man's luxury, in a time when luxury was measured by whether you had a roof over your head and something to wash down the dust. Number 21. Dill pickles. Barrels of dill pickles stood behind every serious saloon bar in the 1880s and the 1890s. Whole cucumbers were brined in vinegar, dill, garlic, and salt, then fished out with wooden tongs and handed to any man who had bought a drink. That was the design. The brine was so strong it puckered the lips and burned the corners of the mouth, sending the drinker straight back to his glass for relief. A pickle barrel cost under $2 and lasted weeks. The brine itself became a commodity. Men swore it cured hangovers, settled stomachs, and gave strength before a long ride. In Dodge City and Abilene, pickles appeared alongside every free lunch spread. The smell of vinegar mixed with cigar smoke and spilled whiskey to create something that was not pleasant but was unmistakably alive. You knew you were in a saloon before your eyes adjusted to the dark. Your nose told you first. Number 20. Smoked herring. Smoked and heavily salted until dark golden, herring showed up on free lunch counters wherever Scandinavian or German barkeepers ran the place. 2 bites and a man needed a drink. 3 bites and he needed 2. Saloon owners in Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Louis stacked them on platters like small bronze daggers, their skins glistening with oil under the gas lamps. Cowboys who had never seen the ocean stared at the little fish with deep suspicion, while immigrant dock workers ate them like candy. The bones were thin enough to swallow whole, which mattered when men ate fast and chewed little, shoveling food in with one hand while holding a whiskey glass in the other. Number 19. Celery stalks. It sounds absurd now, but celery was a genuine luxury in the Wild West. Difficult to grow and expensive to ship, fancy restaurants in Tombstone served it in tall crystal vases as a centerpiece, the way we might display flowers. Cowboys craved it. Teddy Blue, a Montana cattleman in the 1880s, wrote that the very first thing a cowpuncher ordered when he hit town was oysters and celery. Those were the things he never got on the trail. Fresh, cold, and crisp, celery was everything the dusty frontier was not. Saloons that could afford to lay out celery stalks on the free lunch counter were sending a message. This is a quality establishment. This is where the money drinks. The snap of biting into a fresh stalk was the sound of civilization reaching the territories, one pale green rib at a time. Number 18. Crackers and soda biscuits. Plain crackers sat in open barrels beside every bar from the Mississippi to the Pacific. A barrel cost under $1 and lasted months in any climate. They never spoiled. They never softened. They just sat there, dry as the desert. The dryness was the weapon. A cracker without liquid sucked the moisture from the mouth and left a man desperate for his next sip. Paired with cheese or a smear of mustard, crackers became a passable meal. Eaten alone, they were a delivery system for thirst. Some frontier saloons offered nothing else. A plank bar, a bottle, and a barrel of crackers. That was the minimum viable saloon, and it worked from the gold rush through prohibition. First pattern break. The free lunch was not charity. It was the most ruthless customer retention tool in American business history. A nickel beer carried a profit margin of nearly 400%. Whiskey was even better. A barrel of raw spirits cost a few dollars and yielded hundreds of shots at a dime apiece. Spending $2 or $3 a day on bread, cheese, and pickles to keep men drinking for hours was not generosity. It was mathematics. And the mathematics worked so well that by the 1880s, saloons outnumbered churches, schools, and hospitals in almost every frontier town. Temperance groups called it a trap. They were right. But the men walking through those swinging doors did not care, because the food was good, the whiskey was strong, and for a few hours the world outside stopped mattering. Number 17. Boiled eggs, hard-boiled eggs, sat in enormous glass jars on saloon counters, sometimes 50 or 60 at a time, pale and smooth as river stones under the dim light. They cost almost nothing. A hen laid eggs daily, and farms near any town sold them by the dozen for a few cents. One Chicago saloon reportedly went through 45 dozen eggs per meal, 540 eggs in a single sitting. The shells accumulated in piles on the bar, mixing with peanut husks and cigar butts into a kind of frontier confetti. Some men peeled carefully. Others cracked the egg on the bar edge and ate it in 2 bites, shell fragments and all. A boiled egg asked nothing of you. No plate, no fork, no manners. Just crack, peel, eat, drink. Number 16. Pickled eggs. When boiled eggs started to turn, the barkeep dropped them into a jar of vinegar brine and extended their life by weeks. Pickled eggs became a saloon staple so iconic that the image of a dusty glass jar filled with rubbery white orbs floating in cloudy liquid endured well into the 20th century. The pickling added tang and salt, which did exactly what every other item on this list did. It made men thirsty. The technique came from English and German pub traditions, carried across the Atlantic, and deposited behind American bars without ceremony. Customers fished them out with their fingers or with a long wooden fork, depending on the establishment. In rough houses along the cattle trails, hygiene was an afterthought. In better saloons in Denver or San Francisco, the eggs were presented on small plates with a dash of mustard. Number 15. Cold cuts and sliced meats. Platters of sliced ham, corned beef, tongue, and bologna appeared on the counters of better saloons. In San Francisco during the 1880s, sliced meats were fanned across wooden boards. A man would pile meat onto rye bread, fold it over, and eat standing at the bar. No plate, no napkin, just meat and bread and whiskey. Tongue was surprisingly popular, rich and beefy, sliced thin after hours of simmering. Bologna was the cheaper option, dense and salty and perfect for soaking up alcohol. The meat sat at room temperature for hours, covered loosely if the barkeeper was fastidious, left exposed if he was not. Food safety had not arrived in the frontier saloon. What had arrived was hunger, and cold cuts answered it. Number 14. Sardines and tinned fish. When the Transcontinental Railroad connected east to west, tinned goods flooded frontier towns, and sardines became the free lunch wild card. A small tin cost a few cents and contained enough oily, salty fish to keep a man at the bar for another hour. Barkeepers pried open tins and left them on the counter, the fish packed tight in oil that seeped onto the wood and left stains that never came out. Men pulled the sardines out with their fingers and ate them whole, bones and all, chasing the salt with beer. In mining camps where fresh provisions arrived once a week, tinned sardines were sometimes the only protein at the bar. The oil dripped down chins and onto shirt fronts. Nobody cared. Sardines were the frontier's fast food, ready to eat, no cooking required, salty enough to sell whiskey, and cheap enough that even the lowest dive bar could afford to give them away. Second pattern break. Let us talk about the men who tried to eat without paying. The free lunch operated on the honor system. You bought at least 2 drinks, then you could eat as much as you wanted. But every saloon had what the old-timers called human skunks, men who slipped in, loaded a plate with cold cuts and eggs, and tried to walk out without touching the bar. Bartenders handled this in creative ways. Some stationed a bouncer near the food table. Others placed the spread at the far end of the bar, forcing every man to pass the barkeep on his way to the counter. In the roughest establishments, a man caught eating without buying simply got thrown through the swinging doors and into the street. The system worked because most men had enough pride to pay for their whiskey before reaching for the cheese, but there was always someone testing the limits. The free lunch died with Prohibition in 1920, but the freeloaders are still with us. Number 13. Baked beans. Navy beans slow baked with salt pork, molasses, and onions in massive cast iron pots behind the bar. A recipe from the San Francisco Hotel Gazette in 1886 called for that exact combination, cooked until rich and dark, and the pork dissolved into the sauce. Saloons ladled beans into bowls and set them at the center of communal tables, surrounded by forks that soaked in a shared glass of cloudy water. The sanitation was horrifying by modern standards, but the taste was apparently worth the risk. Beans were cheap, filling, and forgiving. They could sit in the pot for hours, improving as they thickened. Boston baked beans were so embedded in saloon culture that the city produced 32 million quarts annually, most of it destined for bars and lunch counters. The frontier carried that tradition westward. Clam chowder. In coastal cities and along railroad towns that received seafood shipments, clam chowder appeared as the premium free lunch offering. San Francisco saloons made it with fresh clams, potatoes, onions, and salt pork simmered in cream until the kitchen filled with briny steam that drifted into the fog. A 5-cent beer earned a bowl. 2 bits for a whiskey got a larger portion, and sourdough on the side. The chowder pot stayed on the stove all day, thickening and deepening. The last bowl at midnight tasted different from the first at noon. Both were good. One just had more history in it. Number 11. Deviled ham. Leftover ham scraps were mashed smooth with mustard, cayenne pepper, and vinegar, then slathered onto bread or crackers. The cayenne hit the back of the throat and sent men reaching for their glass. That was the entire engineering behind the recipe. A small pot served 20 men and cost almost nothing because the meat was scraps from the ham that fed the counter the day before. Nothing wasted. In 1868, the William Underwood Company began selling deviled ham in tins, but most saloons kept making their own because homemade was cheaper and hotter meant thirstier, and thirstier meant richer. Number 10. Pickled pig's feet. Glass jars filled with pickled trotters stood behind bars across the Midwest and the South, pale knuckles bobbing in pinkish brine. Each foot cost almost nothing at the butcher because in the 1870s, trotters were considered waste. Eating a pickled pig's foot was a commitment. You grabbed the knuckle, tore the meat with your teeth, and worked around the bones and cartilage until your fingers were slick with brine and gelatin. Some men loved the silky richness of collagen-soaked meat. Others could not get past the appearance. But in saloons where working men came to drink, pig's feet were consumed by the jar. The bones got tossed on the floor. This was not a restaurant. This was a saloon, and the rules were different here. Number 9. Radishes. Their peppery bite cut through the fat and brine of everything else on the counter. In the 1870s, radishes grew easily near most frontier towns, making them one of the few fresh vegetable saloons could offer without expense. They appeared whole, sometimes sitting in a bowl of cold water to stay crisp through the afternoon. The sharp bite cleared the palate and made the next whiskey taste like the first. That was the secret nobody talked about. The free lunch counter was not just about making men thirsty. It was about resetting the tongue so every drink tasted new. Third pattern break. Here is something most people do not realize. The fanciest saloons in the West did not look like what you see in the movies. By the 1880s, top-tier establishments in San Francisco, Denver, and Tombstone had mahogany bars shipped around Cape Horn, bohemian crystal stemware, oil paintings on the walls, and French chefs in the kitchen preparing the free lunch. The Occidental Saloon in Tombstone, where Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday drank, served Sunday dinners that rivaled any restaurant east of the Mississippi. A miner who struck a vein might walk in with more money in his pocket than a Boston banker, and the saloon keeper wanted every dime. So the free lunch at those places was not crackers and cheese. It was lobster salad and roast beef and champagne on ice. The food was free. The drinks were not. And the drinks were expensive. Number 8, oysters on the half shell. It sounds impossible. Oysters served hundreds of miles from the ocean in dusty mining towns where the nearest water was a creek full of sediment. But oysters were wildly popular in the Wild West. Railroads shipped them packed in ice and seaweed from the coasts, and they arrived still alive and briny. A fried oyster, a clam, or a hard-boiled egg with every drink. That was the advertisement in saloon windows from Denver to Deadwood. Serving fresh oysters told the town your supply chain reached the ocean and your establishment was first class. Cowboys who had never seen the sea slurped them raw off the shell and asked for more. Number 7. Smoked sausages. German immigrant barkeepers brought their sausage traditions and laid them on free lunch counters like edible currency. Blutwurst, servelat, and landjaggers appeared sliced thin on wooden boards in saloons from Milwaukee to Montana. Heavily smoked and salted, they survived weeks without refrigeration. A single sausage sliced thin served a dozen men, making it one of the most efficient items on the counter. In towns with large German populations, the free lunch took on the character of a Bavarian beer hall, with sausages, dark bread, and mustard replacing the crackers and pickles. The Germans understood something the rest of America was learning. Beer and sausage together are not just a meal, they are a reason to stay. Number 6. Crab salad. In San Francisco, fresh Dungeness crab mixed with mayonnaise, celery, and lemon appeared at the better saloons. An 1892 article in the Overland Monthly described the free lunch scene in detail, noting that some saloons offered crab salad alongside bouillon and clam chowder, all for the price of a 5-cent beer. The crab was sweet, rich, and impossibly fresh. It was the kind of food that had no business being free, and yet there it was, sitting on the counter of a waterfront bar. Competition in San Francisco was so fierce that barkeepers escalated the free lunch from pretzels and cheese to Dungeness crab and champagne. The men who drank there knew exactly how good they had it. The men in Dodge City could only dream. Number 5. Roast beef. At the finest saloons, whole joints of beef were roasted in the kitchen and carried to the bar, where the barkeeper carved slices to order for any man with a drink in his hand. In cattle country, beef was so plentiful that giving it away made economic sense. A steer cost about $4 to raise in the 1870s and sold for $25 at market. The tougher cuts ended up at the saloon, transformed by hours of roasting into something that tasted like generosity. Men lined up with bread, waiting for a thick slab. The juices soaked into the rye and dripped down wrists. The roast sat on the bar, under a loose cloth, steaming gently, filling the room with a smell that could pull a man off the street from 50 yards. When the roast ran out, the evening was over. Number 4. Lobster salad. In the most extravagant saloons, lobster appeared on the free lunch counter, and the fact that it was given away tells you everything about the profit margins on whiskey. Shipped from the East Coast in barrels of ice, it arrived expensive but edible, mixed with vinegar, herbs, and oil, then piled onto platters beside the cold cuts and the oysters. A man eating lobster salad at a frontier bar in 1882 was living a contradiction. The streets outside were unpaved. The nearest hospital was a day's ride, but the food rivaled Delmonico's in Manhattan, wealth and wildness at the same sticky bar. That was the American West in a single image. Fourth pattern break. Here is the truth nobody wants to hear. The free lunch was the most effective marketing strategy in American history, and we killed it on purpose. The temperance movement spent decades attacking saloons, and the free lunch was their primary target. They argued, correctly, that free food lured working men into drinking away their wages. When Prohibition arrived in 1920, the free lunch died overnight. Saloons closed. The food disappeared. And America has never had anything like it since. We traded a system where a working man could eat for free in exchange for a nickel beer and replaced it with nothing. Number 3. Whole roast pig. In the grandest saloons, especially in San Francisco and New Orleans, a whole roast pig appeared on the free lunch table during holidays, special occasions, or whenever the barkeeper wanted to make a statement. Skin crackling, fat glistening, an apple wedged between its teeth for theatrical effect. The barkeeper carved slices for any man who asked, piling the meat onto bread with mustard and pickles. A whole pig cost a few dollars, but generated 10 times that in whiskey sales because a spectacle draws a crowd and a crowd drinks. The smell of roasted pork drifted through the streets and into boarding houses, dragging men toward the saloon by their stomachs. It was advertising you could taste. Number 2, chili con carne, a thick, fiery stew of beef, chili peppers, cumin, and garlic, simmered in cast-iron kettles behind the bar, served by the ladleful to any man brave enough to eat it. The heat was ferocious. It burned the lips and the throat and sent men gasping for something cold and wet. Beer outsold whiskey on chilly nights. In San Antonio, Chili Queen set up outdoor stands on the plazas, selling bowls for a dime. Inside the saloons, the chili was free, and it was hotter than anything the street vendors served because barkeepers understood that heat was currency. The hotter the chili, the more a man drank. Some used dried chilies ground to powder. Others used whole peppers roasted black over an open flame. Men argued about it for decades, each town claiming the best recipe, each saloon guarding its pot like a state secret. Chili was the taste of the frontier itself, rough, bold, and unforgiving. Number 1, the full saloon spread. At the top of this list sits not a single dish, but the entire free lunch counter at its peak. In the best saloons of the 1880s and the 1890s, a man could walk in with a dime for a beer and find a counter stretching the length of the bar, loaded with roast beef, ham, tongue, cheese, bread, pickles, sardines, oysters, boiled eggs, baked beans, chowder, crab salad, sausages, radishes, celery, pretzels, and sometimes a whole roast animal carved at the end of the bar. The spread was maintained from morning until midnight. As platters emptied, the kitchen refilled them. The full saloon spread fed thousands of workers, drifters, miners, cowboys, and immigrants who had nowhere else to eat and nothing else to spend. A Sioux City saloon in 1872 offered oyster soup, deviled ham, lobster salad, pickled oysters, salmon, tongue, pickles, lettuce, and radishes, all free with a drink. That was not a bar snack. That was a banquet. And it happened every day in thousands of saloons in every town with a rail stop or a mine shaft for nearly 50 years. The greatest free meal in American history. Nothing before it and nothing since has come close. Try making frontier chili with dried chilies this week. Tell me in the comments which food you would have reached for first, walking through those swinging doors in 1885. Share this with someone who loves history, because these 25 foods built a nation, one salty bite at a time.